With Pokemon Legends ZA set to release in 2025, it's got me thinking a lot about Pokemon lately. And letters. So I figured it would be fun to head back to the first Pokemon Legends game and see how fast we can catch the alphabet in Legends Arceus. In other words, I'll be catching a Pokemon whose name begins with each letter, starting with A all the way to Z. But before we can catch any Pokemon, we first begin the game stranded on a beach in a completely unfamiliar world. Naturally, we decide to place our trust in this random guy who calls himself a professor, and follow him to the nearest village where it turns out everyone here hates us. But that's okay, because all we care about is catching some Pokemon. In order to do that though, we first need Captain Celine's approval to join the Galaxy Team's Survey Corps. At this point, we're given a choice of starter Pokemon, none of which start with the letter A, so let's go ahead and choose Cyndaquil. Because, come on, look at his little spiky mohawk. With our new little fiery guy by our side, it's time to set out into the world. After we battle this guy for some reason. Okay, so if you weren't already aware by now, this game has a very long intro tutorial section. But after learning the mechanics of catching and battling Pokemon in the wild, we are accepted into the Galaxy Team and given a change of clothes. Because I imagine at this point we smell like absolute garbage. But anyways, now we can finally begin our alphabet touching adventure. Kind of. In the early part of the game, we only have access to a handful of Pokemon, and in order to unlock more areas to expand our available pool, we'll first need to build up our research points and star rank. The simplest way to do that is by just catching a bunch of Pokemon, but you can also earn research points by feeding them or defeating them in battle, among other tasks. So with that in mind, I will be catching Pokemon outside the scope of our alphabet challenge, like the Starlies and Shinxes for example, in order to complete research tasks and progress through the story as quickly as possible. None of these will count towards our alphabet progress though, since we haven't caught Pokemon A through R yet. Just think of it like we're sending these Pokemon to the non-alphabetical order factory and processing them directly into that delicious star rank. So after collecting enough Wurmples to build a massive worm army, we are awarded our first star rank, meaning all that's left between us and finally being able to explore most of the Obsidian Fieldlands is this small bridge, because apparently we don't know how to swim. In the way though is Mai, a mighty warden of the Diamond Clan. Surely she must be pretty powerful. Anyways, after that intense battle, she spends a few minutes talking about the almighty creator of the world and other stuff that I'm definitely paying attention to. But when she's done yapping, over 50 minutes into the game, we are finally free to start catching the alphabet. But I'm not going to quite yet. The reason I'm not headed straight towards our letter A Pokemon is because if we progress the story just a little bit further, we unlock a rideable Weirdeer, which will make rounding up the entire alphabet so much quicker and more efficient in the long run. To do that, first we'll need to, of course, set this giant cricket on fire. Then afterwards, listen very carefully to the leaders of the Diamond and Pearl clans talk about the fate of the world or something before battling this little park ranger for some reason. Then back at camp, we're handed a magical flute. So I guess I'll play a little tune for you guys. And that happens to be Weirdeer's favorite song, so we officially have our speedy mount. With everything in place now, it's finally time to begin our alphabet catching adventure. First, let's head west towards the riverside here to find our letter A Pokemon. Oops. To find our letter A Pokemon, Abra. From there, we'll follow the river a bit further south to catch a Bidoof for the letter B. And after crossing a small land bridge, we can catch a Combi on the other side of the river here. This Combi is nice and all and checks off the letter C for us, but we actually want to catch one more here, specifically a female. One for its girl boss energy, but also for an important aspect that will come into play later on. After a bit of searching and some precise Pokeball throwing, we've got our Lady B. Okay, so at this point, we could just continue catching the alphabet, but I'm actually going to shift focus for a bit back to building up enough research points to reach star rank 2. This will help us catch a Pokemon coming up very soon that would have been difficult at rank 1. Also, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that besides catching Pokemon, I'm also making sure to collect any berries, apricorns, redstones, and blackstones we encounter during our travels. These materials not only help us keep the run smooth and efficient, but they'll also play a critical role for future letters that aren't quite as easy as simply catching them in the wild. But anyways, after feeding berries to a bunch of Psyducks and lighting a bunch of Paris on fire, we have enough research points to reach star rank 2. Now let's head back out into the wild and immediately take a nap, because for this next part, we want it to be nighttime. This is so we can catch our letter D Pokemon, Drifloon, because everyone knows balloons only appear when it's dark outside. From there, we'll make our way east in search of an Eevee. Now, Eevee is a rarer spawn than any of the Pokemon we've caught up until this point, so it may take a few times resetting the area to actually find one. And that was the case this time, as it took several resets before finding, funny enough, 2 right next to each other here. So we'll just snatch one of them up for the letter E. Alright, so for the letter F, we actually only have 4 options in the entire game. 2 of them don't show up until much later though, so we can rule those out. That leaves us with Flareon and Floatzel. Now, one of the reasons I've been breaking every redstone we come across is because they have a small chance of dropping a Firestone, which is needed to evolve Eevee into Flareon. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten any yet, so that leaves us with only one choice, Floatzel. Now, one way of acquiring a Floatzel would be to catch a Buizel and eventually evolve it, but that would require us to level it up all the way to level 26, which would take a while. Thankfully though, we are actually able to catch a Floatzel. The only issue is that this isn't just a normal Floatzel. This is a level 31 Alpha Floatzel. Since it's much stronger and more difficult to catch than a regular Pokemon, if we just walk up to it and chuck a Pokeball at its face, that's not gonna work. Battling it to lower its health enough to catch it is also difficult due to the fact that it completely obliterates my entire team. Luckily, we have another approach, and it involves this guy. You see, Moral loves mushrooms, so after handing him a lovely piece of fungus that I've been carrying around, he teaches us the mushroom cake recipe, which will be vital for us to catch the Floatzel. With our newfound Michelin star cuisine alongside our newly acquired star rank 2, we should have a pretty good shot at catching this Floatzel. First, let's sneak up behind it in the grass here, then we'll just, chuck our new gourmet dish straight into the dirt. Now with the Floatzel distracted, we can casually walk up behind it and hit him with a heavy ball. Even with the stealth and backstrike bonuses though, this catch is still far from guaranteed. Several failed attempts later, we're beginning to run low on our delectable mushroom cakes, which is quite concerning, but thankfully with just a few left, we are able to catch the Floatzel for our letter F. On to the letter G now, where we have a handful of good options, but I'm actually going to put that on pause briefly to finish up the rest of the Obsidian Fieldland story now. In fact, I probably should have done this even earlier, since there's a Pokemon we need to catch that only becomes available once we finish this next part. Fortunately, there's not much left to do here though. So after battling the leader of the Pearl Clan and melting her Glaceon, all that's left to do is chuck a bunch of fairy dust at this giant nacho cheese cleavor. Afterwards, with the cheese dissolved and spirits high, we are sent back to town only to learn that the cheese has now spread to the Crimson Mirelands. But like I mentioned, there's still one more Pokemon we need to catch before heading there. If we talk to this lady in town, she mentions a weird sound coming from a wisp in a tree near the Heights camp. And after investigating, it turns out that the wisp is actually just a little baby monkey, which is perfect because Chimchar is the exact Pokemon that we need. I'll explain why he's important a bit later, but for now, let's add him to our squad and move on to the Crimson Mirelands, where we can continue our Pokemon alphabet. And by that, I mean we are going to take another nap, just because this will allow us to catch a Ghastly, which only appears at night for our letter G. Now, just like the previous area, alongside catching our alphabetical Pokemon, I'm still going to be completing research tasks in order to increase our star rank, which will be necessary for later parts of the run. So before heading to our letter H Pokemon, I make sure to catch a couple more Ghastlies, electrocute a Psyduck, and throw some poop at a Carnivine. All for science, of course. And once we arrive at this goopy bog, we can catch our H Pokemon. We catch this hippo. All right, now buckle up because here's when the challenge gets really interesting. For every letter up until this point, we've had at least a couple options in the early portion of the game. For the letter I, there's only one Pokemon in the entire game, and that Pokemon is Infernape. So the reason I caught that Chimchar a little while ago is because Chimchar evolves into Infernape at level 36. When I was researching for this challenge, I spent time trying to figure out if there is possibly a faster way to obtain an Infernape relatively quickly. And to my surprise, there was. Back in the Obsidian Fieldlands, there is actually a single Infernape that is catchable. One minor issue though is that this is a level 65 Alpha Infernape. Now, considering we're just a wee little star rank 2 at this point in the game, none of our Pokeballs, Heavy Balls, or even Great Balls will be able to catch this Infernape, even if he's chowing down on a irresistible mushroom cake, which means the weakest ball that could work in this situation is an Ultra Ball. But considering we don't gain the ability to buy or craft Ultra Balls until star rank 6, this is surely a dead end, right? Well, funny enough, not exactly, because there's another way to obtain Ultra Balls way earlier. Throughout the game, these things called Lost Satchels will randomly appear in all of the different zones you've unlocked. Collecting them will grant you merit points, which can be exchanged for items in town, but in addition to that, they also occasionally include items themselves, one of which can be an Ultra Ball. So theoretically, if we can obtain one of these Lost Satchel Ultra Balls, save right next to the Infernape, then keep reloading after each failed attempt, we can eventually capture it way before we're intended to be able to. Unfortunately though, there's still one more problem that I haven't mentioned yet. This level 65 Alpha Infernape lives on an island, and again, we don't know how to swim. So while this method is super cool in theory, it doesn't really make sense practically because the earliest we could reach this island is after completing all of the Crimson Mirelands, then about half the story in the following zone in order to unlock Basca Legion, which allows us to ride across bodies of water. In other words, doing all of this will take much longer than simply just leveling up the Chimchar. So with that plan ruled out, let's continue progressing through the story for now, as we'll eventually need to complete this area in order to obtain future letters. Plus, we'll be leveling up Chimchar in the process. Our first objective is to make our way to these nearby ruins where it turns out there is a massive chunk of the wall that's gone missing. So let's go searching for it. After battling this guy again for some reason. Turns out the piece of the wall that's missing was stolen by 3 bandits who decided it would be wise to set up their camp basically right next to the ruins they stole it from. We've got some true masterminds here. Anyways, after we beat up their Pokemon, the giant piece of wall is returned to us. So let's just hand it to this old lady, I guess. With that mystery solved, now it's time to fight a bear. Because why not? Side note, I accidentally started this battle without healing my Pokemon first, so it ended up being really close. So if you ever want to attempt this challenge yourself for some strange reason, don't be like me. All that's left to do now is head up north to free another Pokemon from the great nacho cheese curse. This time it's a giant Lilligant who repeatedly tries to butt slam us from the top ropes, but we're too quick for that and eventually take her out by chucking some more bags at her face. Okay, so now that we've completed the Crimson Mireland story, let's shift our focus back to obtaining our letter I Pokemon. To evolve our now Monferno into Infernape, we'll need a quick way of grinding experience. In preparation for this part of the challenge, I tested out a number of different methods, but eventually I settled on battling this level 30 Alpha Parasect near the Heights camp in Obsidian Fieldlands. For one, defeating alpha Pokemon grants more experience than regular Pokemon. 2, alpha Pokemon often drop EXP candies, which typically give a bonus level or two when used. As much as I would have loved to catch that level 65 alpha Infernape, after about 10 minutes of lighting this big bug on fire, we've got our very own level 36 regular Infernape, meaning we're finally done with the letter I. Now, all of that grinding was a result of there only being one Pokemon in this game starting with the letter I. Thankfully, we can move on now to the letter J, where there are surely more than... Oh, that's okay though, because you know how I mentioned earlier how I've been breaking every single red and black stone we come across? Well, we actually got super lucky because while I was frolicking around the Crimson Mirelands, completing research tasks and progressing the story earlier, we managed to pick up both a Firestone and a Thunderstone. This 100% could have been another huge time sink, but instead J is now one of the quickest letters to complete. All we have to do is place this Thunderstone on top of Eevee's head to evolve it into our J Pokemon, Jolteon. Alright, so the next few letters are thankfully very straightforward. Just outside the area where we've been fighting the Alpha Parasect, we can catch a Kricketot for the letter K. From there, we'll cross over to the other side of the river and climb up this hill where we can find a Luxio. I unfortunately messed up a bit here and got spotted before being able to catch it, then accidentally threw a mushroom cake at its face, but that's okay because we can just bonk it on the head and catch it in battle. A little bit further past the Luxio is a cave, which apparently is the secret hangout spot for these 3 Machops. Or should I say 2 Machops, because this one is coming with us. Onto the letter N now, where we've actually only got 2 options in the entire game, surprisingly. Nosepass, which doesn't appear until much later, and the Pokemon that we'll be going for, Ninetales. Now, similar to Infernape, there's actually a high-level Alpha Ninetales that's able to be caught, but it's also located on an island, this time in the Cobalt Coastlands. While this is the next zone we're about to head to, instead of going through the trouble of unlocking Basculegion and farming for an Ultra Ball, we have a better alternative. Upon entering the Cobalt Coastlands for the first time, we're immediately forced to listen to a musical performance by the leader of the Pearl Clan. Then after melting her Glaceon again for some reason, and also this random Eevee, I guess, we're free to explore the area. Okay, so while we're not able to catch a Ninetales directly, what we can do is catch a Vulpix, which is actually where we're headed now. Similar to Eevee all the way back in the Obsidian Fieldlands though, Vulpix is a bit of a rarer spawn, so there's a good chance we won't see one right away. It does take some time to make it up to this spot though, so hopefully there is one. And thankfully there is. So let's go ahead and snatch it up real quick. With Vulpix in our possession now, we can make use of the Firestone we picked up earlier and evolve it immediately into Ninetales, completing the letter N. Alright, now it's time for the rapid fire portion of the challenge. Let's go ahead and warp back to the Crimson Mirelands. First, we'll run a bit south to find an Onyx for the letter O. From there, we'll warp up to the Diamond Settlement to catch a nearby Paris. The letter Q, you might expect, would be a difficult one, but it's actually quite easy. Besides having a cool little fiery mohawk, there's another reason why we chose Cyndaquil as our starter. The same reason why he's level 29 and hasn't been evolved yet. It's finally time to evolve him now into Quilava and complete our letter Q. Okay, the letter R might be even easier because all we have to do is take a few gallops this way and catch this... Oops. It appears that I am out of items to calm down angry Pokemon, so I'm just gonna battle one of these Rhyhorn and catch it that way. Now let's head back south to catch a Stunky for the letter S. A bit further, we'll capture a Teddy Ursa for T. Then make our way over to this inconspicuous tree stump here, where if you look closely, there's actually an unknown hanging out inside. So we'll just, throw a, catch it real, there we go. All right, just a few letters left now. Remember all the way back towards the beginning of the challenge when I specifically caught a female combi? Well, now's the time for our girl boss B to shine because only female combis are able to evolve into Vespiquen, our letter V Pokemon. Now there's no Pokemon starting with W that we're able to catch around here, so let's take a quick detour back to the Obsidian Fieldlands, where right away we can find a Wurmple to add to our worm army. Okay, so we finally arrived at the letter X. A lot of you may have already seen this coming, but unfortunately there are no Pokemon in Legends Arceus that start with the letter X. Does this invalidate the entire challenge? Maybe, but what we can do is head down to the Grand Tree Arena, and if we look up at this branch here, squint our eyes a little bit, we can see something X-shaped with a perfectly aimed feather ball throw. Oh, wow, I did not expect to get that on the first try. We can catch the X-shaped unknown, which is better than nothing, I suppose. Wait, what is that? Oh my goodness, it's a Xatu. Let's quickly catch it. What are the odds? All right, only 2 letters left. Let's quickly head back to the Crimson Mirelands. And as we make our way towards our letter Y Pokemon, if you liked this video, it would mean a lot if you subscribed. And let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me attempt this challenge in other Pokemon games. Okay, let's just go ahead and catch one of these Yanma here for Y. Then all that's left to do is warp up to the Diamond Settlement to catch our final letter Z Pokemon, Zubat. And with that, to answer the question that absolutely nobody asked, it takes 3 hours, 50 minutes, and 3 seconds to catch the alphabet in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.